I apologize. My video cut a little bit short um, earlier while I was filming. Picking up on where I left off on this topic of overcoming nihilistic thought processes. The important thing to really not necessarily consider, but take a look at when it comes to understanding the intrinsic link between our ideas and concepts of meaning and purpose and what we subscribe the values that we have upon and the actual nature of the world that we find ourselves placed in. One thing to realize why nihilism stems from kind of a materialistic mindset is that modernity has put humanity into a kind of time capsule of sorts. We are constantly undergoing a kind of fast tracked acceleration of the use and capacity of our minds living in the kind of civilization that we do. The civilization, for whatever reason, which I don't really want to get into, um, that we are living and existing in and dwelling in has been constructed in a manner where it is intrinsically always putting the capacity of the human mind to task. In essence, it is constantly and continuously pushing us into a repetitive loop of thought based constructs and the need for thinking continuously. Now, I'm not advocating for a world in which nobody thinks. However, I want to point out that the nature of a world that continuously requires the capacity of the mind to be overwhelmed with keeping up with the pace of a world that has essentially locked itself into a very seemingly rigid structure of ideas based upon the calendar year and how time intrinsically moves through our 24-hour day. That building an entire world upon what essentially is a idealistic schedule and a counter of sorts could only spell burnout intrinsically for the organism that is a human being. We are not automatons, and unfortunately, this world treats us as though we are, which speaks more about the truth of this world than anything. Human beings, no different than any other species on this planet, require rest and nourishment and the replenishment of the organic structure and system that comes intrinsic with having a body. We are not built to be in motion constantly and continuously without stopping. It does a major toll on the organism to continuously put yourself through an accelerated level of progression continuously throughout portions of your life. And I know speaking from this now because my days more or less are spent basically playing and practicing music and more recuperative than anything. I still go to the gym and work out. I still work jobs, but the majority of my actual priorities actually now revolve more within the realm and territory of giving my body the adequate and sufficient level of rest and periods of meditation throughout the day, and then intrinsically actually utilizing my body to continuously maneuver and do things constantly, because there's not actually an innate kind of emphasis on getting a result through effort, through imposing will on things beyond the given parameter of what essentially are now just very minimalized interests that allow and kind of shift the focus of my overall lifestyle towards well-being and a kind of more nourishing development and basically not longevity so much as the ability to sufficiently recover and recuperate through what I for and from what I put my body through on a regular basis. What does this have to do with nihilism? Well, nihilism is basically the result of burning out the mind on hyperfixating and essentially um, putting the brain through the paces of survival mechanisms or intrinsic thought constructs that try to emphasize or construct a narrative for the mind to understand what it is basically incapable of grasping, that it is a biological process and that it is ephemeral and it is finite. The mind, the human brain, basically, as an organism, cannot understand that the nature of its existence is more or less a conduit that consciousness kind of transmutes and transmits energy through. The mind is like a receiver. When all power is directed towards the mind and the mental capacity, and consciousness is not seen for the innate property through which the mind actually gains its power, the mind takes itself to be the actual perceiving identity of this organism. And the mind basically accelerates without stopping or hyper accelerates without stopping to try and process this or to put into form a construct for consciousness, which is not something the mind is actually capable of doing. So what ends up happening is that the mind actually unknowingly and unwittingly kind of undoes its own identity structure through basically wearing itself down. And this is where we get the kind of illusory um, effect that a lot of people call the dark night of the soul, or um, just depression in modern like medical standards. The thought processes that basically spell and put us through these kind of like dark existential nihilistic thoughts, or even the kind of esoterically seeming symbolic thought constructs that form, that are often rooted in symbolism or some deeper subconscious existing mechanism, very similar, if not the same mechanism, potentially as dreams. The things that we experience and see in depression, and what attributes to nihilism, is basically the attachment of different energetic constructs to these thoughts. We perceive these things, and then we basically, because we are identified or have identified ourselves mistakenly as thought, we think the inherent nature of such things is negative or bad or moralistically juxtaposed to how we see ourselves. Because we are identified with thought and identifying with thoughts, they're wrapped in very complex subconscious mechanisms that are below the surface of our everyday ordinary lives. So we don't take them to be ourselves, but in reality, they are an extension of a vast kind of hidden network in the mind that is more deeply rooted than just what we experience in our everyday ordinary lives. We have to understand that we as an organism come from a biological chain, and our very genetics are very old. The things that produced human beings and where human beings come and stem from are literal lineages that have existed for generations and generations, and the DNA structures that came to produce that are probably far older than anyone can really fathom or piece together. Um, when it comes to the nature of nihilism, I think what really is happening is that we have developed into a species that has such a subconscious rooting in fear based defense mechanisms that has basically evolved to limit the capacity through which it interacts with potentially hazardous external stimuli that we kind of innately have developed into our current modernity, not necessarily consciously, but subconsciously, as a way to kind of escape the intrinsic harsh harshness of nature and the physical reality. When we understand what a human really is, it's not so much that we are a nerve ending that's feeling all levels of everything constantly, in the mental, the physical, the emotional, the subconscious, different states of consciousness itself, even in sleep, in dreams. It's not so much that we are like a nerve ending at the brain, though in a sense we are. We are a conduit through which experiences pass on all different levels. A human being is a prism of experiences, and it can be a harsh reality to understand and know the totality of that, because it's all taking place within you as this mixed alchemical concoction of